Tell me your name.
My name is Annette Jones White.
And when were you born?
I was born August 29th, 1939.
And where were you born?
I was born in Albany, Georgia.
And who were your parents?
My father was Paul Lawrence Jones, and my mother was Dolores Berry Jones.
And what did your dad do for a living?
My father was a carpenter.
Okay. And Mom, what did she do?
My mother was a laundress. She did laundry for doctors, for white doctors. She did their coats and pants, because in those days all of the doctors wore white pants, white coats. And she also did laundry for their families. And she was paid $3 a basket.
Okay. Now, how many siblings did you have?
Well, there were 4 siblings. 2 sisters and 2 brothers. One, there were 6 of us, but one died. Well, not died, did not come to term. My mother had a miscarriage. So that I have a brother, well, deceased now, next to me, and then a sister, and then another brother, and then a sister.
Okay. Go ahead. I'll let you finish. What were you going to say? Okay. Next question is, what are some of your earliest memories of Albany as a kid?
Well, I'm blessed with a memory that goes back to when I was 3 years old. And we lived on the south side of town. And my earliest memories are of my neighborhood and of the people there. Our church was right across Newton Road, so it was less than a block to go to church. We had neighbors who were more than middle-aged. There weren't very many young mothers on my street. My grandmother's friends were on that street, and they took me to Sunday school, and I grew up in the church. And I was not aware. I knew there were white people because we lived next door to a nightclub, which was not proper, but it was owned by white people, so no one cared if it was in the neighborhood of black people and near a church. Although we got petitions up to get rid of it for 19 years, it remained until they sold it. But I knew that there were white people, but I didn't know how big a difference that made. The insurance men who came were white, and they were distant but courteous. And the man who owned the nightclub was white, and I would see him. But when I was 3 and 4, I had no idea of segregation or anything like that. But my parents talked about it, but I didn't understand it. But I heard what they said, and they never tried to keep anything from me.
Okay, that segues into my next question. When you talked about folks getting a petition together to get the nightclub out of a residential African American neighborhood, did your parents play a major role in some of the early organizations that would try to do things to improve life for African Americans in Albany?
No, my parents were, how can I say this? They were not a member of that group of black people who were doing those kinds of things. I looked at my neighborhood in the way the streets were, and the further back you lived, the less money you made, and the fewer people you knew who were professional. My father was not a professional person. However, because he became an elk, he met some of the people who were doing those kinds of things. My father, I don't know if you know a lot about O.C. George, but O.C. George, Melvin George's father, was one of the pioneers in Albany who, I mean, what he did is just momentous. And he and my father were friends. And I'm not sure how they became friends, because it seemed to be a little, I can't think of the right word, but Mr. George was very intelligent, kind person, and he didn't see people in terms of class or how much money you made. But he worked on voter registration. The Klan had a reward out for him, dead or alive. He would go from county to county registering people, teaching them how to register, taking them to vote. I think he took Dr. Reagan's parents to vote. And so while my father knew him, and he knew Dr. Reese and Dr. Hamilton, who would help people when they came into Albany running from the lynch rope or whatever, they would provide medicine, money, food, whatever they needed, tickets to another place, to relatives. So my father knew those people, but he was not a part of that group who was doing those kinds of things. So far as the nightclub was concerned, he helped get up petitions, and I think the minister of our church helped to put the petition together. And of course, some people would sign it and some people would not. But petitions were gotten up over the years, and we were always a part of that and signing it, but nothing was really done. The first thing that I remember was that I was getting some new shoes. I was going to get some new shoes. And I think these new shoes, I don't know if I really needed them, but I had been told by an old lady that everybody said could work roots and put spells on you, that I wasn't long for this world. And I had become very upset and crying. I had stopped going outside to play, and I was just moping around. So my mother told me she was going to take me downtown and get some new shoes. Now, when I was at that time, I didn't think about maybe she was doing this to cheer me up, but this is in retrospect what I'm saying now. But she took me downtown, and it was a beautiful day. We had to walk, of course, and I had never been outside of my neighborhood. In fact, I had never been outside of a 3-block radius in any direction in my neighborhood. So as we walked along, I was happy, and she let me walk on the outside so I could see the things. And when we got to the parts of streets that were paved, because our street was not paved, I could hear my feet on the concrete, and it just sounded great, and I was just happy. We kept walking, and we passed out businesses in the black community, and she would tell me what they were when I asked, and we kept going. And then we got down to Jackson Street, Harlem, and I smelled, I think probably was the first time I smelled Jimmy's hot dogs. And I was asking her, what is that? And it, it was a strong smell. And we kept moving in the next block, and there was a bakery. And I never smelled that. And she told me it was a bakery and that they had cakes and pies, and that when we came back, she would get some donuts. And I was thinking, donuts? That doesn't sound good, because I knew what dough was, and I thought it was some nuts made from dough. So we went down, and I just looked at my head was just like this, and we got to Belt Smith, and this is where she was going to get my shoes. And I didn't know it at the time. I just thought my mother was fat, but she was pregnant. And we got to Belt Smith, and she opened the door, and this scent of new things just, I was overwhelmed. And we went in, and I saw all of these people. There were rows of seats, and there were shoes all around, and there were white people sitting in these seats, and there were some packages in the other seats, and might have been 1 or 2 seats empty. But my mother didn't go and sit down. We just walked in and we stood near the side and we looked at different shoes, and I was just excited, and I saw some Mary Janes and I said, I want those, I want those. So the clerk came over and she said, can I help you, girl? And I said, I want some new shoes. And she just ignored me and she kept looking at my mother, and then I realized she wasn't talking to me, but I thought she was because she said girl. And she repeated herself, can I help you, girl? And so my mother told her that she wanted to look at the Mary Janes, and she told her what size. And so when she went to get the shoes, I was just watching how the other clerks were helping the people, helping them put the shoes on, and they had what we call them slipper spoons, and they would slide their feet in and all. So when the lady came back with my shoes, she just shoved them at my mother. And so my mother took them, and then she knelt, and she had a hard time because, you know, she was pregnant. And she told me I put my hands on her shoulders, and then she took off the shoes that I had on and she tried on the Mary Janes. And then she told me to walk around in them to see how they felt. And she said, make sure I walk on the rug, you know, not on the floor. And so I did, just strutting and thinking I was a princess, and I was ignored. You know, nobody was looking at me, and I thought they would be because I was used to older people in my neighborhood, you know, responding positively. So then after my mother decided to get the shoes, and she went up to pay for them and stood there forever because she wasn't waited on, even though she was there first, she was waited on last. And then I had to go to the bathroom, and I told my mother, and I can remember my mother went to the clerk and she said, my little girl has to use the bathroom, she said, and I don't think she can hold it. She said, can she use the bathroom? And the clerk said, no. She said she's going to have to hold it because the bathroom is for whites. And so my mother grabbed my hand, and she was going to try to run me to Broad Avenue Arcade to Union Dry Cleaners. It was a black business downtown. I don't know how that came about, but there actually were two dry cleaners. But we didn't make it. We got outside of the door, and that's where I urinated on myself. And there were these white people, children and adults, and they laughed. And I will never forget that because I had never been treated that way. I didn't know adults would treat children that way because nobody in my neighborhood acted that way. You trusted adults. You could go to them if you were in trouble, even if they weren't your parents. But so I learned that these people who were white, I mean, I got it right then because all of them were the same color. They weren't my color. They weren't my mother's color. And I don't know how I've internalized that, but I knew that they were white people that did that. And so I walked all the way home with my shoes squishing. You know, my mother tried to dry me, and so that was terrible. And I never wanted to go downtown again, but my father convinced me to go because he was going to build a bar, and he needed a special kind of glue. And I didn't see my father often because he was working all the time. So this was a chance to be with him, you know. And so
How old were you?
4.
Okay.
And we went to get the glue, and Santa Claus was at the store. This was near Christmas, and I wanted to get in line. I knew about Santa Claus because I had 3 books. One was called Christmas in Other Lands, and it told about the name of the you know, St. Nicholas and all of that. So I said, can I get in line? And he told me no. And he kept telling me no. And I worried him until he just said okay. And I wondered, why doesn't he want me to see Santa Claus? So I went over, and there were about 3 white children in line, and I got behind the last one. And when it got to the one in front of me, I was listening. I said, he's greedy, Santa Claus. This is what I said to myself. Santa Claus is not going to bring him anything because he kept saying what he wanted. I wanted a doll carriage because I had gotten a doll the Christmas before. And so when it came time for me to go, I had my smile ready, and I had been good, you know, and I was just standing there beaming, waiting for him to lift me up, but he reached behind me and pulled out the white kids. And he kept doing that. And I just stood there, and the lights seemed to get brighter, and I got hot, and I felt like I was shrinking, and I just stood there. I couldn't move. And so my father finally noticed, and he just took my hand, and he tried to tell me that that wasn't the real Santa, that that was his helper. But I was thinking, why would he let somebody help him that mean? And I cried all the way home because I thought I wasn't going to get anything for Christmas, because I really did believe in Santa Claus. So those were the two first things that I remember. I realized that there was a difference in the way the people in my neighborhood acted and the white people acted. And this was sort of filed back. And
did it create any bitterness toward white people for you?
well, it wasn't bitterness. It was like I didn't understand it. And I would feel a lump in my throat. And that lump, it just became a permanent thing when something would happen. I would feel this lump.
Now, when you become a teenager, were there any incidents then that added on to that?
Yes. Even though we were in the black community, there were poor whites who lived in our community, but they didn't go to our schools. They were bused out of our neighborhood into the white neighborhood to go to school. So the school bus, Newton Road split my block. I lived on Corn Avenue, and Newton Road ran across Corn. So when I had to go to junior high school, to Carver, which was on Corn, I had to cross Newton Road. Well, every day the bus would come by just at about the time that I would be crossing Newton Road. And on rainy days, for the first two, I think it happened to me twice in a really big way before I learned to run. On the rainy days, the bus driver, who was white, would come off of the Newton Road was paved. He was come off of the pavement into the side, which was dirt. There was no sidewalk, and there would be puddles of water, and he would just run through it and splash water all over me. And Newton Road had not always been paved. I can remember when the convicts used to work on it, and they wore balls and chains. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about now. Is he would do that on purpose, and then I learned to, I would be dodging and not knowing when he was going to cut the bus over, and the children on the bus would say things like, "Hey, little nigger," and then the boys would say, "Want a wallet for $1." Well, I was about 13 or 14, just at the point when I was insecure about my femininity, and just hearing that every day almost, it was hard, because it would make me feel inferior, really. It would make me feel that I was not respected, or because I had begun to look at boys, and there was some that I thought were cute and I liked, and they treated me nice, and to have them say things like that, it made me feel like what my mother used to call one of those Lulabelle women. That's what she called the ladies who lived in the red light district, as my daddy called it. So that was really bad. And what was one incident that was involving this, puddles and being splashed. All of the girls in my little group were wearing saddle Oxfords and bobby socks and felt skirts with the poodles on them, and the cinch belts, and the 3/4 length white blouses, and I didn't have it and petticoats. And my father said he had to put food on the table, and it didn't make sense for girls to have on all those petticoats. And then he saw one girl, she looked like an umbrella. And
with all that crinoline, stiff crinoline standing the dress up.
Yeah. Some people have 3 and 4. So I wanted, and a felt skirt was out of the question, and I just wanted it, and they would wear it like every Thursday. And I would be with them, and I would be the only one that didn't have it on. So my mother had a friend in Chicago who would send us boxes of clothes, and they were actually from the white rich people she worked for. And they were good clothes. They didn't wear them until they wore out. They wore them until they were tired of them and wanted some more. So she would send the boxes. So we got this box, and she had it layered. And she had a name on it for each person, and my grandparents were first because they were the oldest, you know. And mine was at the very bottom, and it was a turquoise felt skirt. Oh boy, was I happy. I mean, it was just great. I couldn't wait until Thursday. And so I waited, and I convinced my grandfather to get me a cinch belt. He gave me some money, and I got the cinch belt. I already had a blouse. And I didn't tell anybody in school. That was hard to do. I just wanted to show up on Thursday with it on. So Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep well, and we lived in a big house with a tin roof. And I could hear when it started to rain on the tin roof because it made that noise. But it sort of rained all night, not too hard, but it stopped. So next morning I got ready, and even though my father had said, you know, he couldn't afford it and all of that, he realized how much it meant to me, and he told me I looked nice. And so I started up this red clay hill, and of course the bus was coming, and the bus came, and he cut out, he did the same thing, and I was so excited, I just wasn't thinking. And the red water got on that white blouse, on the felt skirt, and I had to turn around and go back home. And my grandfather took the skirt to the cleaners, but they could never get it out. They never got that out, so I never got to wear it. And so I remember that, and that's when I started to get resentful. That was the first time I know that I was angry and resentful. And I never mentioned a felt skirt or anything again. It was just like, you know, that was my one chance, and it was gone, and that was it.
Somebody killed the magic.
Yep, killed the magic. I never wanted to go to Albany State. I don't think anybody wants to go to the college in their hometown. And I had a very good time at Monroe High. I had a nice reputation. I had built up my little empire, as my husband used to say. You know, I was known by all of the teachers. It meant something to be known by teachers, for them to know you and to think that you were nice and that you were doing the right thing and that you were getting your lesson. And but I never knew that my friends' parents were putting away money for college, and that they had insurance policies that would be read upon graduation. You know, I just thought that college was out there, and that perhaps I could get to go, but I wasn't sure. My folk never talked about me actually going. They wanted me to go. All my life around the fireplace in winter, they talk about how a good education was what you had to have. They didn't have it, but they knew that I had to have it and that I needed it. But they never said that I wasn't going. I just sort of assumed that I would be going, but I didn't know what it entailed, so we never talked about it. And then the counseling was poor. I mean, I liked the counselor, but it was poor counseling. So graduation night, I was excited because I was a speaker, and class night had come and gone, and I was a class poet, and so it was just a joyous time. And then I was sitting there on the stage with the other speakers, and then they started talking about the honors and all. And I knew about all of those school honors, but then when they started talking about Joseph Booker, who will be going to whatever college, and they even talked about the insurance company that he was insured upon, because and they told the amount, and I was listening, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if my parents have an insurance for me to go to college. And then, no, they didn't. And so all of these students my little group They were going to Tuskegee, Talladega, and different places, and they were going to go on. I had scholarships, partial scholarships to Payne, Bennett, and Spelman, but my father couldn't match the money. So it was a very sad time when fall came and they all went away and I was left in Albany. But because I had been in the DCT program with B.B. White, who had fought all of his teaching life there to get the same program in our school that the Whites had, where you would leave school at noon, work in the neighborhood black schools, and you get units for graduation and a small amount of money, but you got on-the-job experience. So that when you left high school, theoretically you could get a job in almost any office, except they wouldn't allow us to have shorthand, because all of the jobs downtown required shorthand. So if we would go down there, they could say, well, you're not qualified. You know, it has nothing to do with discrimination. You don't know shorthand. But they arranged it that way, you know. So I was able to get a job working for C.B. King. And of course he had not reached, you know, prominence yet. But still, I think I would not have been able to do that had I not had that course with Mr. White. So after I worked for Mr. King, Attorney King, for a while, he said that he didn't want me to misunderstand what he was saying, that he was happy with my work, but he felt that I had more to me than that, and that he would encourage me to go off to college. And he asked me about, you know, my family and why wasn't I going to college. So I explained it to him. He said, well, Albany State is over there. And I was like, yeah. And so he said, you know, it's you have to think about the teachers and all of this. And so he talked to her, and he talked to my father. And with my father, it was embarrassing for him, because it wasn't that he didn't want me to go. My father had to find work. You know, he was hired. He was a carpenter, but he would only get work with white contractors as a laborer. And there was a black contractor, Wesley Williams, and he hired black carpenters. But I guess he put the work around. You know, he hired my father sometime, and he'd hire somebody else. So everybody got a chance to work. So then B.B. White also talked to my father. And so he told me, okay, he would see what he could knock up. That's how my father would say it. And so he would build cabinets. And I've always thought that initially he borrowed some money from my uncle, but he never said that. So that's how I started at Albany State.